What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to NeverLag. I'm Levi, that's Zach, and this is NeverQuest, the show where we sit down and discuss a certain topic of the show, talk about what games we've been playing recently, and whatever else might come up. Some nonsense for sure. So if you're into it, you can support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/NeverLag. And of course, right here on YouTube by doing what you're doing, watching or listening, wherever you get your podcasts from. And thank you for that. So let's get into it. What's been new with you, Zach?
Oh, not too much. Work's been pretty busy, so my progress with video games sadly has taken a little bit of a hit. And not much fun to report. I don't have any hilarious anecdotes today, but I'm sure next time I'll have some burrito related thing to discuss.
Oh,
but,
you know what? I do have a burrito related thing just for you.
Excellent.
Just for you.
I'm so glad you're saving the show here.
Yeah, I honestly, why push the record button if you don't have a burrito anecdote to share?
Absolutely.
No, have you had the burritos from Starbucks?
No, those
Well,
sound like they could go either way.
yeah, I don't know if they're keeping them or not. They kind of had them for a while and then they got rid of them and now they're back again. And I had some of them are good. I like the veggie ones better, but I got the bacon and egg. It's not great. It's really not great.
Okay, yeah.
And so I had it left over and I was like, man, I guess I'm going to eat this, but they're terribly bland and just they're not even close to their sandwiches. So we have a big jar of green chilies in the fridge and heated up a bowl of that, spoonful into every bite. All of a sudden it's an amazing burrito. So it will transform any burrito that needs it. So
it just goes to show you
tip.
The best burritos are ones with good ingredients. Maybe that's really obvious, but are there burritos, like, do they call them wraps? Like breakfast wrap?
Yeah, I think they do. I think they call them because they're above the word burrito.
Yes. Exactly. Which is funny because a wrap is inferior to a burrito 100% of the time, in my opinion. But I actually have had the bacon and egg wrap. I don't know. It was a while ago. The driest thing I've ever eaten. And
yeah,
like
it was
you said,
terrible.
Bland and dry. It was so bad.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I needed just an entire jar of green chilies, or
it was a game changer. It was a game changer. I was like, holy crap, this is actually delicious now. So
it's
there
things
you go.
Like that.
Go get your.
It's things like that make me wonder, like, how much should we just be eating condiments like straight out of a jar? You know what I mean? Like, I guess you need a little bit of texture aside from the condiment, but
this is what you think about daily, isn't it?
Almost daily, yes.
You know what? Next week we're gonna have you rank. We're gonna have you just jars and spoons, and we're gonna have you rank condiments out of the jar.
That sounds great. Honestly, we should do like a tangential show where we do kind of like a good mythical morning thing, and we eat a bunch of condiments and say, is this condiment edible by itself? It's a meal. That sounds awful. I don't actually want to do that, but
anything for the views. All right, well, there's my burrito anecdote. Granted, not hilarious at all, but seriously. And also not something you can do in any part of the country, because if you travel outside of the Midwest, you're going to be hard-pressed to find some actual green chilies. So, actually, no, maybe not. You'll find green chilies, just not green chili. But I digress. Our topic of the show, our question today, is something I've been kind of brewing on lately. And you put it more concise. What is it? What makes a game click with you personally, right? And so the premise of this question essentially comes down to, I kind of feel like the gaming industry is a little bit different than any other industry, entertainment industry, in that people who really like video games, I think we feel somewhat compelled to play all different kinds of video games, whether it's from friends, peer pressure, or the game's media. And I don't think people feel this as much in other forms of media like TV or movies or books, right? And I know for myself personally, over the past few years, I've played just a wide assortment of games. And I truly do I fairly like a wide assortment of games. But of the past year or so, I've been coming to terms with the fact that, you know what, I don't think I like as many games as I play. And really trying to hone in on what it is that I like versus what I'm supposed to like or what other people tell me is good, right? Have you given this much thought?
A little bit. One of the things I thought of that's kind of related is Do I want to optimize for as much enjoyment as possible, or do I want to try and discover new things that I might not have known I liked? And that it's kind of a balance, because if in theory, I think what we're told is you need to try all these things. There's so many great things out there, and obviously there's truth to that, right? But to do that, you have to strike out more, because if there's a bazillion subgenres of a video game or some other form of media, not all of those are going to click with you. Or what's even more complicated is sometimes like there's a subgenre of a video game or book or movie where I try one or two and they don't click, and then another one does for some reason. So it kind of feels like you have to strike out a lot more to get a wider variety of experiences. The upside is there are things I never would have thought I would have liked. Like if you hadn't been so interested in the Souls games, I don't know if I really would have given them as many tries as I have. And now with Elden Ring, I'm really getting into them. Um, so there's that, or there's like, do I play the comfort foods? Like, am I am I an 11-year-old at a Mexican restaurant who's still ordering chicken tenders or a hamburger because it's what I know I like? So I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting to think about too, like what makes a game actually click for you, because I found that sometimes it's not necessarily the genre specifically. Like they're correlated, but I don't think
Yeah,
it's
I agree.
100% the genre or the developer. It's really hard to say, and it's not even like one thing. It's such a weird combination of factors that make a video game click. And we can get into the specifics of like what
Yeah.
all of those different factors might look like, but it's interesting because I think too, with the constant stream of media from places like our show where people talk about all the things they love in video games, it's easy to feel like almost an obligation to enjoy everything, and that gets I sometimes get overwhelmed by that feeling of I'm not keeping up. I'm not playing everything I need to play. I'm not reading everything I need to read, which is silly because like we're doing this for fun. So those are my like high level
It's
thoughts.
for fun.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I think it really is a balance. It's obviously a balance, just like anything, of trying new things, but really finding your line where okay, this really isn't for me, and being able to move on and just make peace with it, right? Instead of, I
Mm-hmm.
do think in the past um, I have more of an attention span than most. I have many friends who, uh, you know, will start something else. They play 20% of every game. You've gotten better. You've
I've
gotten a little
gotten better.
better,
I have gotten
actually.
better.
You've climbed up the ranks here. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, for myself personally, I have the opposite problem. I will think, oh, this game looks neat or interesting, or this person or that person or these people like it, and I'll start it, and I'll get 3, 4, 5 hours in, and I'll not be feeling it, and I'll push through and I'll finish the game, and 20 hours later, 30 hours later, um, my opinion hasn't changed much, and you're just like, well, that was a lot of time to try and like something, and it's really tough to find the right time, because there's always that fear of, what if this does click for me? What if it gets good later on? What if something finally clicks where I understand what makes this game good or fun for me?
Yeah.
um, it's tough to know at what, and every game is so different. Every game is, like you said, there's different genres, there's different lengths of games. It's very tough to come to some sort of universal procedure you have where you can determine, okay,
Yeah.
this, you hit the buzzer, this game is
Yep.
done, we're moving on. um, it's a tough thing to try and figure out.
It is, and I think some of it is like dependent on how much experience you have with different genres. An example of this, I was super inexperienced with Metroidvania video games, and I started Hollow Knight. I don't know, 4 years ago, and I got an hour or two into it, and it wasn't clicking. I wasn't really having fun. It was kind of neat, but it just wasn't working. It was a little drab, and it felt, I like, for lack of a better word, hollow, at the surface. So I put it down for a few months, and then I tried it again, started it over. I got like 3 hours into it, had the same feeling and experience. And then I put it down for a year or two after that. But I'd heard such amazing things from you and others that I was like, I think I need to give this a better shot. So what I've learned for myself is like a couple hours usually isn't quite enough for me to decide if I like something. I wish it was, because that would be very efficient. I was trying to be efficient. Like there's other games to play. I have a busy life. I'm just going to move on. But in
Yeah.
this case, I'm glad I didn't, because I picked it up again last year, and uh, first couple hours kind of had the same experience. It was okay. It just felt okay. I get 5, 10, 15 hours into this game, and it becomes one of my favorite games of all time. Um, so I think part of that is like I wasn't super experienced with the genre. Um, I, I needed to give it more of a chance than however much percentage like 3 hours of the game was, which is
And
not
what
very much.
genre would you say that was pushing you away? The Souls side, the Metroidvania side?
I don't know that there was anything specific. It didn't, the sum of its parts didn't quite click for me. Like the combat was a little hard, but it hadn't developed some of the nuance that you get by unlocking your Metroidvania, some of the different abilities you get. Um, that I think it's partially the starting area in that game is intentionally like you're going underground and kind of like
It's
a
pretty aimless, directionless. It gives you very little
it does.
about
Um,
where to go, what to do.
and I didn't realize like how much depth the lore in the world would have. I didn't realize how in tune the ambiance and the soundtrack would be. Um, it's a very immersive experience that over time draws you in, and you feel like you're living in Hollow Nest, the world within which this takes place. But it took some time for that to click. And it's funny because I read a lot of like books, like fiction, and I think my favorite fiction books, for the most part, are slower burns. I read a lot of sci-fi fantasy, and those things tend to have like you have to get into the world. They have to establish what the world is like and what the rules of sci-fi or magic are or whatever. And it takes hours to get into that, and I'm cool with it. So I find it kind of funny that with video games, I like haven't had that mentality initially. But I think for games I need a little bit longer is what I've found. Like, and I need 5+ hours to really tell if a game is not going to work for me.
That's
um
the number I was going to say. I
yeah.
feel like 5 hours is the good average, which is a lot of time still. But
It's a
honestly,
lot of
like,
time, yeah.
unfortunately, that's just how games work. Like sometimes they're trying to do. Uh, there's just so much more going on in a video game than there is a TV show or movie, or maybe less so a book. I think a book could be comparative, but even still, that is a one directional form of media that's conveying a linear story
Right.
to you.
Yeah,
Whereas a
you're not
game,
interacting
yeah,
necessarily.
the interactivity really just kind of exponentially distorts the being able to tell if something is good or not right away. So,
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question to you next would be: can you think of any games? Do any games? I mean, Hollow Knight you just kind of brought up. Is there anything else where maybe I vehemently recommended it to you and you tried it and you forced yourself to play more of it than you wanted to? It never clicked, or maybe games media just universally praised a game that you just, despite trying, couldn't get into. Is there anything
Yeah.
that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, other Souls games still come to mind. They're kind of universally praised. um, but those I still like. I've given some of those more of a fair shake. Like I probably played 8 to 10 hours of Dark Souls 3. Probably played around 5 hours of Bloodborne. And those are tough because parts of them really clicked for me, like the setting, the ambiance. Um, I think some of the mechanics were hard for me to get used to. So that is an area where I think it was more of my preferences at the time weren't matching the play style, even though a lot of the other elements were working for me. But I think that's changing, which is another thing we can talk about. Is like, does this ever change for you? And I think in this case,
Yeah, yeah,
yes.
it totally does.
Um, yeah.
Well, I have if you
I'd
don't
love to
have
hear.
anything else, yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
what I've been realizing, which is interesting, because I have my list here of all-time favorite games, and I've always kind of thought like, oh, I like this genre, I like this genre. Honestly, I like most genres. If I had to pick a genre I don't like off the top of my head, it would be a roguelike game. I don't like the random repetitive elements typically. But as I'm looking at my list, it's like all of these fall into different categories. I mean, you've got Breath of the Wild, Hollow Knight, God of War, Sekiro,
Hmm.
Subnautica, The Witness. I mean, there's just they're all different genres. So what connects them all for me? And I think recently I've been starting to realize um, two things, two things I think that kind of help. give me an indicator if a game is for me, or at least that like my favorite thing in games, what I like to play. And I think the first one I'll start with is I really like a simple, well executed gameplay loop and concept. I really like when a developing team comes up with a specific character or gameplay mechanic and they exploit that to its maximum and build the game around that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is I'm finding I don't adamantly dislike this, but I it's not my vibe. It's not my favorite thing when a game gives you a million options. And a lot of this has been brought on by Elden Ring, actually, recently, because that is a game universally praised, should be completely up my alley, like a top game of all time. And though I do really like it, and it probably will make my top 10 all time, we talked in the past about how it never clicked for me on the level I thought it would. And I think I just came to the conclusion that to me, they sacrificed a certain amount of a specific experience for variety, for
Yeah.
allowing a player to do kind of whatever they want. You can have this magic build, you can have this sword build, you can have this dex build. That's normal for Souls, but then you add in the extra co-op and the summons that you can bring. And there's just when a developing team tries to give you as much freedom as possible, they are sacrificing balance. You cannot balance for everything. It is impossible. We've watched Destiny try to do it for years and years. And to me, I just personally don't have the kind of fun that I see some people have with builds
Mm-hmm.
and build crafting and min maxing. I always just end up going to YouTube to find the most powerful thing, right? And at the end of the day, it's the most powerful, but is it the most fun? Probably not. And that's kind of the conclusion I've come to, is that um, we always want more choice. People just in general, they want more choice. They want their freedom to do what they want in life, in games, and whatever, right? But often the irony of that, the tragic irony, is that with that freedom, we make terrible choices. We make the wrong choice. We think we know what the right choice is, and in the end, it's not the
Mm-hmm.
right choice, right? I don't want to make the choices. I'm bad at making them. My choice is to play your game or not. After that, I want you to have made the choices, and I want to experience what you made. And that's kind of it. And so yeah, I've started to realize this because I look at these games and I think, okay, Zelda, they had a specific design concept. They went all in on it, and there's really not too much fluff in that game. The game is about the open world. You
Yeah.
know, your Link doesn't get all these. You get a couple abilities that help you traverse and stuff, but you're not leveling up Link and putting stats into dexterity and doing different things, right? Creating a magic build for Link. Like, you're not doing all these different things. The world is the game, and it's perfectly executed, in my opinion. I look at games like Subnautica. Same thing. Like, there's a clarity, a simplicity to the design concept in that game,
Mm-hmm.
that keeps it from being cloudy. Like, the intended experience is there. If you like it, you're really gonna like it. And then when I get farther into more of an action game, I think of Sekiro, obviously. Even Ghost of Tsushima, I think, to a little bit. There is a little bit more diversity in that game, but I think
Mm-hmm.
obviously this is a sliding scale. There's no black and white here. And Ghost of Tsushima, I think, leans more towards a Sekiro style than it does a Dark Souls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then recently, Sifu. And these games, they go all in on your this character, you have this specific skill set, and all of the enemies and bosses in this game are specifically designed with that skill set in mind. And because of that, we can make the gap between victory and failure razor thin, because we know exactly what you have going into that fight.
Yeah.
Whereas in a game like Elden Ring, you could go in with just this giant amount of different builds. They can't account for that. So I think
Yeah.
for me, that's something I'm really finding in the past year, is that not that I actively dislike those games. I still, Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, still phenomenal games that I absolutely love. But what I love about those games has a lot more to do with atmosphere and level design than it does the build diversity. I honestly, if they made those exact same games and stripped out the RPG element and made them more like Sekiro, I would like them exactly the same, if not more, in my
Yeah.
opinion. So that's kind of a realization I've come to. Do you have any thoughts on kind of that? I tried to specify it, but it's kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, I mean, I think you put that really well. I think the gameplay loop thing is true. If you don't have a really satisfying gameplay loop on, I don't know the exact time frame, but I want that dopamine hit every couple of minutes or whatever it is, right? Like the best games have a way of giving you a sense of progress. I think is part of that loop that you have. So I love games that make me feel like I'm making some kind of progress, and I think that's related. But to go back to your whole thing about balance versus diversity and of choice, like how many choices you have available, I'm coming to find that too. I think a ton of choices sounds better, right? Like, oh, there's so many things you could pick from. In reality, that's just kind of overwhelming. I have to make more choices than I'd prefer to make in my day to day life, um, and I also I want them to deliver me something amazing. A few choices can be nice, like going back to Destiny. I always liked okay, there's three classes, and then maybe there's one or two really different like superpowers I can go towards. Do I want to have lightning or do I want to, shoot a shadow bolt? A few of those choices can be fun, but when it gets to the point of like so much build diversity, in concept that sounds cool, and I know there are people who really like that and make very interesting use of it and put together just wild builds, and that's fun to watch and observe. But myself as a player, I don't have the time to like tinker with as many of those things or the interest to put the time in. And a lot of times I find myself kind of looking for a couple of archetypal styles, picking, do I want to be a
Yeah,
sword guy or a mage guy? And then looking up what's the best way to do that.
yeah,
It's overwhelming. The amount of choice sometimes feels overwhelming, and this might be a preference thing, right? Like I didn't click as much. Yeah, this is another question you asked. Like, what are games that bounced off of you that people loved? Skyrim didn't really work for me, and I think Skyrim was a very open ended, a lot of different play styles that you could pick from, and that didn't quite work for me. And I think there's a portion of that there. Um, I really like when a game feels like you're getting what you're supposed to be getting. One of the things that stresses me out or drives me out of games is where I spend hours doing something and I feel like, did I just miss the point? Am I doing the wrong thing? Am I wasting my time? Am I going where you want me to go? Um, which again, it's a sliding scale. There are some games where that's less of a problem, like Breath of the Wild. It's pretty obvious you're supposed to go wherever you want, and um, so sometimes it works. It's not like these are black and white. I'll probably contradict myself because there are times where I've enjoyed that, but a lot of generally, if I feel aimless or directionless in a game, that's something that's counting against it, not helping me. And if I have to pick from a bazillion options, that's stressful. I have to learn everything, figure out what might be best, and there's a certain fear of missing out. You feel where it's like, okay, cool, I'm doubling down on strength, and you're like, oh, maybe I should have gone back and done the mage build or some other build. And as much as love to have the time to do all of those, realistically, I can't always do that. So if I'm in a game where I'm like, okay, I'm working within the parameters they've designated and it's really enjoyable, um,
yeah.
that's yeah,
And
that's kind of
I
something I
think
found.
that I would venture a guess here. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I do think that the majority of people, um, I feel like 90% of people probably like if you think of Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3 or any Souls game, people who play Souls games, I bet you 90% of people every time play the game the exact same way, right? They go in, they make their character. For me, it's always been heavy strength, big sword, right? That's how I play every game. I really, really have to force myself to play something other than that. And now the argument could be made that if I were to, and I have once or twice, but if I were to, maybe break through the mold, so to speak, and really experience a different build, maybe I could feel differently about it. But I do think that the percentage of people who truly, truly enjoy opening up that menu and seeing just a million different things and really min-maxing and figuring out, oh, if I move this and do this and do this, all of a sudden it breaks the game. I feel like that's a very small percentage of people. The rest of us just kind of know how we want to play, and then we go to YouTube, right?
Yeah.
And is that really that much fun? I'm coming to the conclusion, no, I'm kind of tired of doing that. I'd prefer a game like Sekiro where you have a character, I have some things I upgrade and unlock along the way, but it's along a very linear chosen path by the developers, and very precise and controlled through the whole experience. So, but yeah, I looked down my list, and that was one thing I kind of finally started to, with the thumbtacks and the red yarn, I started to connect all the games. I'm like, oh, you know what? I think honestly, I look at them, and World of Warcraft and currently Dark Souls 3 are the only games on my list that really offer build variety, right? So they're kind of the outliers. Everything else, I mean, what didn't I mention? God of War is a very specific, you're playing as Kratos. It's a very specific build path. Red Dead Redemption 2, Assassin's Creed Origins, Death Stranding. I mean, these are all very specific experiences where you just don't have a ton of player agency. So I thought that was interesting. Is player agency always great? And I think the answer is no. And for me personally, especially when I'm looking at a game, that's more of a knock against it for me than anything else. And not just because it can be overwhelming and it's not something I find terribly fun, but also because of just the logistical, practical standpoint that developers can't balance for everything, right?
Yeah.
If they could have the game dynamically adjust to whatever build you had, great. That would mitigate a lot of my issues. If I knew that, okay, I'm going with this build, now bosses are going to change dynamically in the world, and they're going to interact with me differently now that I'm playing from range, and they're going to, their difficulty is going to be adjusted in this way. They've been calibrated to match what I'm doing. Awesome. That is not even remotely practical. We will probably never see that because of the amount of resources it would require to do that for every build in a game. So that's one of the main things I've noticed. And like I said, I've noticed this specifically. I'll talk a little bit more about this here in a minute. But Sifu I've been getting into Sifu, and it's one of those very, very specific gameplay games where you are what you are, and you just got to learn. You have to master the mechanics. There's no real like in-game cheat or way to kind of cheese things. There is sometimes, but I've really been enjoying it, and that kind of put the cherry on top of this thought I've been having. The other thing I've noticed is that in the past year or two, I really don't have much of a tolerance for cinematic, a game where its merit lies mostly on its cinematic qualities. If a game is 20% gameplay and 80% story or something along those lines, I don't have the patience for it, and it's not fun to me. I think back to, I think it was last year, Guardians of the Galaxy came out, and a lot of people really liked that game. I mean, it didn't do as well as Square Enix were hoping, obviously, but a lot of people really swear by that game, and like, what a fantastic game. And I agree that it did some great things. I love that it wasn't monetized. I love that it was just an honest game with some really good character development. I mean, they did a great job with the cast. The story was pretty interesting, but at the end of it all, that game was like, I think it was at least 30 hours. And when I was done with it, I was just like, it was another one of those where I'm like, I wish it was a movie. Like, I didn't need the little bit of gameplay that I got in it. It wasn't good enough to justify the amount of time. Because think about it. If that was a movie, if that was a well-executed movie, 2.5 hours maybe, right? You sit down, you enjoy the characters, you enjoy the story, 2.5 hours. But because it's a game, you're talking 30 plus hours. That's an immense leap in the amount of time that you're dedicating to something. And so if the gameplay doesn't justify it, it's just too much time to invest in something. And so for me, I found the gameplay to be lacking. It was okay. It was really, really like discount Final Fantasy VII remake,
Mm.
and just not enough going on. And then what's the other one I think back to? Guardians of the Galaxy, and oh, this one's controversial because this one I feel like I'm going to be alone on this one. But Jedi Fallen Order was another one, and that one's less like Guardians of the Galaxy because it does have the gameplay there. I just found the gameplay to be too loose and not very, I guess, not tight, right? Loose
Yeah.
combat didn't click as well, and so I didn't enjoy playing that game as much. All I wanted to do was see where the story went. So I ended up looking up the story on YouTube because I'm just like, I don't want to spend 15 hours playing a game I'm not really enjoying just to get to the cutscenes, right?
Yeah.
So that's one I've really started to notice as well. I don't know how you feel. Are you? I think you're much more story driven. So
Mm-hmm.
if gameplay is mediocre, are you good with that? If the story's really good,
It depends. I feel like it's shifting a little bit for me. In general, I appreciate, I think, the narrative more in a video game than you. Not that you don't appreciate it, but I think it will go farther for me than it will for you, and I'm willing to push through more mediocre gameplay. But it depends. Like it kind of depends on like how tedious is the gameplay. If the gameplay is really tedious or really clunky, Final Fantasy VII is a pretty great game, but there are parts of that that are really tedious. So that is an example like that frustrates me and will count against it. A game with a really great narrative, I tend to want to finish, and there is something about a narrative driven game that feels more satisfying when you get through it and actually beat the game. Like it feels like cheating to get the narrative without beating it. Not that it always,
yeah, I agree. That's why I've hesitated to do it in the past, but I'm finally
right.
getting to the point
But
where I'm not spending 20 hours.
I'm at a point in my life where I'm kind of with you, so it's a tough trade off. But a lot of
Yeah,
my favorite games growing up as a kid, as a teenager, had a lot of cinematic moments that were the carrots on the stick that were really driving me. Like a lot of Final Fantasy games back in the day, Kingdom Hearts to an extent, um, and there's probably a million others that I could, if I spent more time thinking, I could come up with. But I remember being so excited to figure out where's this story going, and I felt very invested in the world and the characters, and so it was really satisfying to hit those climactic moments. And in some ways, those could be more impactful than a lot of movies because you felt like you were part of the journey versus a movie I'm just sitting and observing. That's not always true, but that's generally kind of how it felt. Um, I think for me now it depends a little bit. I still feel that way, but if the gameplay is really tedious or really clunky, it, it's less motivation to get through to those cinematic moments, and I'm just busy enough these days that Jedi Fallen Order is actually a great example of a game where the story was really cool, the gameplay was fairly good. I agree, it felt like clunky, not just the combat, but some of the traversal at times. Like I just remember fairly occasionally being frustrated with the game as much as I was also enjoying it. And there was other stuff going on in my life, but I didn't finish that game. I got, I don't know, 60-70% of the way through it. I would like to know how it ends. Part of me, like I haven't gone and watched how it
you'll
ends
never
because
know.
I really want to experience it like as a game, but the gameplay was lackluster. That's also controversial. The gameplay was clunky enough
It
for me
is.
that
It is.
I'm not
People love that
super.
game.
I get why. Like I think I liked that game a little more than you, and I want to go back and finish it and experience it as a game because I think that's more satisfying. Like when you know when you face off with like the Sith Lord person and you have to beat them, and then you get the cutscene after, and it feels like you've overcome something. So
Yeah, it is
I
different.
I would say that drives me a little bit more. And if a narrative is really, really good, then I will put up with more lackluster gameplay. I will say I don't prefer it when a game is like 90% narrative for the most part. Like if you think of like the Telltale Walking Dead games where it's like almost purely cinematic. I don't
Yeah.
hate it, but that's not nearly as interesting to me. And if you say, hey, we have a video game where there you have to have a really unique and interesting premise in other areas for that to work. There are a couple of games like Detroit Become Human and Heavy Rain that kind of fall in, they're not maybe 10%, but it kind of falls into that camp. And I've played
Yeah.
a few of them and I do sometimes like them, but it's a harder sell for me. And with the case of Detroit Become Human, I I like Heavy Rain was so well done that I was willing to try another game from them. along the same lines. But a new developer says, hey, we have a cinematic game where, it's mostly you experiencing the story. There's not a ton of actual gameplay. I'm less likely to be interested in that. But you have something like God of War, 2018 God of War, or even The Last of Us 2. This is going to be controversial because a lot of people hated it. I have mixed feelings about it, but I thought it was a good balance between interesting narrative and like fairly regular narrative beats mixed in with pretty good gameplay that made it a pretty compelling game, regardless of some of the more controversial choices of what like this happens in the story and some of the things I'm not sure how I feel about. I think that game's balance of interesting, compelling narrative that moves you forward, plus fairly slick and fun gameplay. I thought that was actually a decent example of that. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of on board with you. An interactive movie type game is it's pretty close. It's up there with like roguelites. I'm not a fan. It's not my genre. It has to break through in some other way or be exceptionally good for me to really take interest in it. And it is a sliding scale. I mean, I do care about narrative too. I really enjoy a good narrative in a game, but the problem is that we're not. It's not as if we're devoid of good narrative, right? Like,
Yeah.
I can go watch a good movie. I can go watch a great television series that's coming out every couple months these days. I can go play. Looking at my list again, God of War has an amazing story and backs it up with fun moment to moment gameplay. You enjoy playing that game from moment to moment. One for me, Red Dead Redemption 2.
Mm-hmm.
Great story, great characters, but also really enjoyable to play. Final Fantasy VII, I think, is a really, really good one. A good
that has a good balance
use
mostly.
case here, because Final Fantasy VII at times walks that line of being tedious to the point where you're like, come on, let's move it along here,
Mm-hmm.
But it has a certain thing about it that the narrative is very good. It's enjoyable once you kind of get into the speed of the characters and everything. But I thought the gameplay in Final Fantasy VII was honestly, it was a game changer. Can't think of the right word right now, but like, it was incredibly innovative and
Mm-hmm.
very well done, to the point where I can't wait to play the next one. I can't wait for other games to try and mimic it. And that's kind of why that's another reason why Guardians of the Galaxy was a little disappointing, because it's kind of the first time I think I'd seen someone try to mimic that. I forget what they coined it, but basically turn-based action, turn-based real-time action.
Real-time turn-based. I forget.
Yeah.
I know what you're getting
I mean,
at. I
like,
forget what they called it. But.
yeah, we haven't seen it. It's literally a new thing. Like, they created a new way to play a video game and bring the turn-based combat of the original Final Fantasy VII and most RPGs of that time into modern day, and they did it. Like,
I know.
it
I want to
works.
see.
It
I want to
works
see that
well.
used across the board, or way
Exactly.
more often. Yeah.
So, and I think Guardians really just kind of, it was definitely discount Final Fantasy VII remake.
Mm-hmm.
It was not as polished. It wasn't as fun to play.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's my point. Is that there are games out there with really good narrative and gameplay, and so that's the point at which I think my sliding scale has started to become more picky over time, because there's just, we only have so much time, especially for entertainment, right? That after everything else has to get done, and there's only more and more games coming out. And for a while there, it was just like, oh, look at all these games coming out. Got to play them all. This is so amazing. What an industry. What an industry. What a time to be alive for this industry, right? And now it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, I'm kind of over the quantity. Yeah. And I just want to sift through and pick out the quality. So those are my those are kind of my conclusions I've come to as I'm trying to, and like you said, it changes. It changes over time. You got to reevaluate your tastes, what matters to you, what you like. Every couple of years, it may change. Maybe you're about to go on a From Software binge and just love all of their games where you wouldn't have 5 years ago.
Yeah, something I've noticed is sometimes I'm really not feeling something, even though it's something I like, and I'm just feeling a different thing, like a different type of gameplay, a different genre, a different specific mechanic, and I'm trying to get better about switching to what I'm really interested in playing. I'm doing this with reading too, where it's like I want to finish everything so that I can say I've experienced it, I can talk about it intelligently, so that I can feel like, you know, my money wasn't wasted. But sometimes I'm not feeling it, and maybe later I will. We have so much choice that it's you might as well enjoy the entertainment that you're playing right now. Um, and I think too, like there's all these different sliding scales. For me, it's becoming a thing where it's like I want to look at what is the sum of its parts, what are the different components, and does that mix sound interesting to me? And then you have to see if that clicks as well. But just saying, hey, you know, when I was 10, if you said, hey, I have a fantasy RPG, you've sold me. I'm on board. Now it's like I need
Take
to
my
know.
money.
I need to know some more of the specifics to make a decision. So I guess my last question is: uh, do you ever finish games even though you don't want to? Or maybe another version of this question is, um, you know, do you feel like you sometimes are deviating from the industry? Like, how do you avoid the pressure of media and the industry of what you should be playing?
Um, do I finish games I don't want to? I I certainly have. It's tricky because it's like, at what point are you far enough into a game that it's like, why would I stop at 80%? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
may not totally be feeling this, but let's wrap it up. Let's grab the trophies, right?
Yeah.
Um, but they're absolutely. I think for me, this is something I've done, especially with trophies, which is an ongoing struggle for my obsessive completion thing. But I try to get better about it. But certainly, there have been games where I get 80% of the way to the platinum trophy, and this is a whole other discussion we need to have on NeverQuest, which there needs to be a trophy police, some sort of regulations. But there's always that one trophy that, despite looking them over, you kind of missed, or you didn't fully grasp how how bad this was going to be, and and then you're too far in, and then you play the game till you hate it. And I've done that many times. But as far as the industry, I think what's really helped me kind of gain some clarity and um, really think about what I like in a video game recently, of the past year, like I said, is I've started the majority of the games I've been playing have been well after launch. And I think that's helped me to break free of the wave, right? You're always trying to catch the wave of what's been released, what all of your favorite podcasters are talking about, what all the reviews are about, what everyone's got gameplay videos and tips for, right? You want to be a part of that, and it's a wave that lasts usually a week to 2 weeks. In rare cases like Elden Ring, I think it was like 2 months, which is incredibly rare. It's
Right.
amazing how long Elden Ring remained top of mind. But that's such a small amount of time when we're not in the games industry. You know, we're trying to make a living and have a family and do other things, right? It's hard to ride that wave. And I think that lends towards you playing games you may not like as much and not even noticing as much, because
Yeah.
it's more of a social, it's an isolated social thing. You're
Mm-hmm.
alone, but you're kind of enjoying the social aspect of it online. So me being able to break free from that, and honestly, it's had more to do with the fact that games just release in a poor state, and I finally just said enough. I'm just gonna wait on games, unless it comes out and I know it's good. I'm gonna wait. And yeah, I think that's what's helped me kind of gain some clarity and be like, you know what, now, because after a couple months go by, you start to look at that game you thought you were going to play. No one else is playing it. The only reason for you to go play that game is if you want to play it at this point.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other outside influence, and so you can really kind of weigh whether or not you want to play something. So I think that's kind of been the catalyst for this whole conversation and me coming to better terms with what I like to play.
Yeah. I found something similar with video games as well as books and movies, things like that, where you see all these people talking about these things. You're like, I want to experience this. I want to be up to date. And it's interesting to hear people talk about these things. So it feels like some of that interest is maybe real, but it makes it feel disproportionate. And then, as you said, as time goes on and it's out of out of the zeitgeist and not really being blasted across social media. It has to come from a more genuine place. And I found myself thinking about, what do I actually feel like playing or reading right now? And being more at peace with the fact that it's okay if not everybody else is doing that. It feels nice to be able to check off something on your social media, like on an app where you keep track of games you play. It feels nice to go on YouTube and talk about something right while it's hot and be able to, engage with everybody about that. But it's not always possible. And yeah, I think it's a more genuine way to enjoy things sometimes is to just wait a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the verdict I've come to. So anyways, it's an interesting topic. I mean, obviously we don't have people here to bounce this off of, but maybe one day the comments section will be flooded with people describing why they like certain games or what they've discovered. But I think it is very interesting. It's a weird industry, and it's a problem I think that's unique to this industry. And step one to overcoming it, I think, is realizing it's a problem. So
admitting we have a problem.
admitting we have a problem. So there you have it. So it sounds like, do you have anything you've been playing to update on, or is it just me?
Not a whole. I played a little bit of Elden Ring. Like it's gonna be months of me saying that. I think.
So now you're 30. You've gone from 32% to 33%. Is that
32 and a half.
32
Yeah,
and a half.
I'm at a point where you have to fight two bosses at once. You're fighting this one boss, and then halfway through the fight, you get this one boss's health to halfway, and a second boss comes down, and it's pretty brutal. So the 30 or 40 minutes I played
Are those
over the past week,
the golems,
the gargoyles.
the gargoyles?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's
The thing is, in Elden Ring, you could be talking about any number of fights. They like to
know how
throw
many
two at you
gargoyles there
that
are
entire game.
Yeah, in the Banished Land, or not the Banished Lands. That's a fantasy book. In the
The
Lands
Banished
Between.
Same thing.
Too many fantasy worlds in my head right now.
Same difference.
Yeah, there's a lot of gargoyles, but it's fun. But it's one of those things where this boss fight is just, and the way they fight, like the specific summons I have get killed pretty quickly. So it's like I really gotta do it perfectly and like get their health down to the right point, and then pull out a summon, distract the other one. And I haven't quite beat them. I got close, but I might be on that a little longer, hoping to keep making progress there. And that's basically it. Kirby has lost my interest more or less.
Oh yeah,
it's not terrible. It's moderately enjoyable. I might go back to it at some point, but
just a game you'd be forcing yourself to play, huh?
Yeah. So I stopped playing it for the moment. What about you?
There you go.
What are you playing?
Well, it's very interesting. I get to report I have not been playing Genshin.
Wow.
Genshin's adrift. It's adrift in space right now. They're dealing with what they're dealing with. They've indefinitely delayed things. Mm-hmm. The game, for the first time ever, is like legit quiet and nothing going on, which is very strange. It's amazing they've gone this far without doing that. But so I've been sick for the past 10 days, 2 weeks, and once the fevers subsided and I was able to be a conscious human again, I have been playing a lot of games. So I started off with getting the platinum for Yoku's Island Express, which is my second time playing that game. I played it originally on the Switch, and just a lovely game. I mentioned it last time. Go play that game if you haven't. If you like Metroidvania games, and you're open to just a very fresh take on it that works way better than you would ever think, go check it out. I mean, keep your expectations in check. It's not, it's a smaller game, a smaller experience, but it's very cool. I wish they would do a sequel. I don't know who made that or if they're going to do a sequel to, but they should. From there, I moved on to, I started digging through my backlog, and I actually made on our app, we have a list of, because there's the amorphous backlog, and I was like, this is just, it gets hard when you finish a game to like reach into the bag of the void of your backlog and figure out what's next. So I was like, all right, let me make an actual queue of like the top 4 games I know I need to get to next, if I have nothing new release coming out. And they were Kana is still on there, Pathless, Lost in Random, and Sifu. And so I started off with Lost in Random. I jumped into it. I was like, let's give this a try. Let's see what this is all about. For those who don't know, Lost in Random is I don't know who made it, but it's a very Tim Burton-esque style looking game. I mean, it's straight out of Tim Burton's head. Um, and it is basically, it takes place in a world where everything is governed by dice, the roll of the dice, right? The queen is the only one left. The dice are like magical things, and they're
Mm-hmm.
basically extinct. The queen is the only one left with a dice. I'm trying to remember which one is. I believe we've changed plural dice to just dice as well. I had a whole grammatical. I had to look this up on Google when I was talking to my wife earlier, but it's very cool. You go through, six sides of the dice. There's six towns, and each town is defined by its number. There's one croft, and then you go to two town, which is, it's just very imaginative. The whole thing is just pure imagination. I mean, two town is essentially everyone has two personalities, and whenever the queen rolls a two, they switch their personalities.
Interesting.
As well as the mayor of two town is this giant mayor with a top hat, but out of nowhere, out of his hat grew his alter ego, kind of a villainous alter ego that now has been crafting an upside down town. There's downtown and then there's upside down town. And so there's two towns. There's one upside down and
Mm-hmm.
there's one right side up. And they're all like that. They all have their kind of just idiosyncrasies, and it was always exciting to be like, what's the next town going to be like? The story was very good.
Yeah, that sounds really
Uh,
interesting.
it was really good. It was one of those where I got done with it and I'm like, I wish this was a movie, but I
Mm-hmm.
also enjoyed playing it because the gameplay for this game is, and this is another thing I'm realizing I really like, if I were to categorize in genres, I really like strategy, which I knew this. I like strategy, I like puzzles, but I really like card building games where you build a deck
Mm-hmm.
and strategize around that, right? This game kind of takes a Final Fantasy approach to that, in that you unlock cards and you get to kind of build a deck. It's really weird. It's real time action. You're fighting, like you shoot an arrow, whatever, but without a card, all you have is a slingshot. So you build
Mm-hmm.
up this like energy, and then you get to roll your dice. And when you roll your dice, you have a two, a three, a four, a five, a six. That's how many points you get to spend on your deck that you got of random cards that you pulled. And in those cards, you can get weapons, you can get hazards, you can get defensive abilities, all
Huh.
different things. And so let's say, okay, I'm going to grab my sword. I'm going to grab this bomb. I'm going to grab this ability that sucks all the enemies into one place. And time freezes while you select your cards and place things. And
Okay.
then when you start time again, you start combat again. And it was just super clever, and it had some clunkiness. It had some issues that could be ironed out for sure, but tons of points for just imagination. I mean, they just shot for it, and I think they hit most of it. It was really um, really clever, really fun to play, and like I said, I really enjoyed the deck building. It's not super intensive or crazy by any means, but getting to situationally switch out some cards, and then the frustration of getting the wrong cards or rolling the wrong dice, it
Right.
kind of worked in the game. Very fun. I think the overall game took 10 to 12 hours. I got the platinum for it. Um, biggest critique are that the trophies are super missable with no chapter select. So I had
Mm-hmm.
to very carefully make sure as I played, I was getting what I needed without spoiling anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just so sick of that. We need a trophy system that's better. We need to be better, people. Like, I should be able to play a game, not worry whatsoever about trophies, and then at the end, without too much frustration, just go back and get the trophies I
Get
missed.
whatever
Like,
you
that
need to
should
get.
be
Yeah.
that should be the bar for games. So, but I mean, if that's my main complaint about a game, it did pretty good. At the end of the day, um, it wasn't like life changing. It wasn't. I wouldn't say it's a must play, but if you like any of the elements I described there, I think it's a really good game.
Yeah. That's
From
not
there,
that's got me
oh,
super
go ahead.
interested. I
Go.
added that to my list. But
Yeah,
I'm actually really interested in everything you mentioned about it. The weirdness looks fun, and so knowing they executed well with the story and hearing some of the concepts in more detail makes that sound really fun. As a side note, I've added trophies to our list of topics for the future, so
yeah,
we'll get
yeah,
into that in
definitely.
the future.
Oh my goodness. Don't get me started. So yeah, if you like any of the elements I mentioned there, it's a good game, and it's way overrated. Man, they did not market this game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just
You
came
mean
out, and
underrated?
no one. What did I say?
Overrated.
I
The
say
opposite.
overrated,
Yeah.
underrated,
Yeah.
or the opposite of overrated. Yeah, it did not get. I just feel like this went way under the radar, and
Mm-hmm.
no one knew about it when it came out, and then its moment left, and probably a lot of people who would like this game never played it. So check it out. And then lastly, the one I'm running out of time to talk about, but I have more to say about, is Sifu. My
Ooh.
goodness, dude.
That's on my list
So
as well.
yeah, so I decided, okay, next we're gonna hop into Sifu because I got this shiny steelbook physical edition that showed up early in May, and it was time. I was finally feeling not sick enough that I was like, okay, I can handle whatever this game's gonna throw at me. And within an hour, it's funny. I thought we were gonna do NeverQuest a couple days ago. I had played like an hour or two, and I was ready to just be like, this might be my game of the year. Like within an hour, I could just tell this game is for me. It is fantastic. I love the
Wow.
art design. The art design is and the art style reminds me a lot of The Witness.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
my brother mentioned Arcane a little bit, but I really get a lot of Witness vibes from this,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a super clean, very stylized art style that really speaks to me. I love it. I love the way it looks. The visual presentation is great. The combat is it's close to on par with Sekiro. It is
Wow.
very it's one of those games where it's very specific, very tight combat, and it demands that you learn its game. It demands that you learn how to play it and just master being the Sifu, right? Um, so yeah, it's fantastic. It's a shorter game. It has roguelite elements, but um, not any of the ones that frustrate me. And I think back to Returnal, especially for you,
Mm-hmm.
where and a lot of people, the fact that you couldn't save in that game, and runs could be ruined by the system crashing or you getting busy or whatever. Um, they have, similar to how Final Fantasy VII kind of created a new combat, a new old combat system, reinvented it. I feel like Sifu kind of reinvents or even carves out a brand new genre of roguelike games. And in my opinion, it gets rid of all of the elements I hate and incorporates some new ones I really, really like. And let me try and think of them concisely, but basically, this game is not random. So that's the first thing. I mean, and you could say it completely eliminates it from that category to begin with. But when you die, you do kind of start over, but it's not random. So every time you start a level, the enemies will be in the exact same place every time. The items will be in the exact same place every time. And for me, I like that. I like really coming to know an area in a game, or just feeling like I know it like the back of my hand and I can run through it, and seeing that progress, right? The other thing it does that is great is it's hard to explain. This game is a little bit hard to explain and a little hard to understand. That is a critique I have for it. When you get into it, you'll be trying to figure out the gameplay systems, and it'll take a minute. But basically, you do have to beat this game in one go. When you die, you have a limited number of resurrects. And each time you die in a row without defeating some sort of boss or mini boss, your death counter gets higher. So let's say I die once, I age 1 year. If I die again immediately, I'll age 2 years, then like four, and it gets, 7, 8. And you have to beat the game before you reach 70 years of age. So there is a built in um, timer with which you have to beat the game. But the great thing, the best thing about this game that saves it for me from the roguelite genre is that when you beat a level, there's 5 levels in this game, 5 areas you go to. When you beat that area, it saves your best. It's like a high score. So let's
Mm-hmm.
say I beat level 1 at 33 years old. From now on, I have a bookmark at 33 years old. I can go back and play level 1 again if I want and try and beat that, or I can continue on with level 2 at 33. And if I die in level 2, I can always start level 2 at 33 years old.
Yeah.
And I love it so much because it really, instead of just making the game frustrating and like every time you die you start at level 1 and you play level 1
Right.
over and over and over and over and over and over again and you get sick of it, you can bounce around. You can be like, okay, I've progressed. I'm getting kind of old now. Let me go back to level 1. I think I've gotten better. Let me see if I
Yeah.
can bring that age down to 25, 24.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I did that. Now let me see if I can get level 2 beaten before 30.
Yeah.
And it's just such a better, much more refreshing gameplay experience, much less frustration. And to me, it just really hits the concept I think roguelites aim for just way better.
Yeah.
At least that's how I feel. I think it's much more enjoyable to try and go back in and just beat a certain level at a high score. And so anyway, subsequently, since this was like 3 days ago, I've now beaten the game, platinum the game this morning.
Wow.
Um, I think it is right now. I need some distance from it, but I think right now it is my front runner for game of the year. I think it will beat out Elden Ring for me for game of the year. As much as I loved Elden Ring, this to me, Sifu was a near perfect experience. And I got done with it and I was like, man, I kind of wish there's more, but also it was perfect. It was the perfect amount of content. Man, the boss fights are fun. All 5 of them are just a treat. Like, I don't know, they're just so fun to fight. It's like Sekiro. They're all very specific. You learn their patterns. Um, Excellent game. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, it does some cool things too with the levels. The first time through a level, it's kind of Dark Souls in this way. The first time through a level, you have to take the long way, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to go this alternate route, but eventually you'll unlock a door or get a key for somewhere that allows you to go somewhere else in the level to shortcut faster to the boss.
Yeah.
And so that first time through a level is much harder and more difficult, but then once you get that key or whatever it is, then you can head straight to the boss. And the trade-off is there's certain areas where you can upgrade your character that you'll miss.
Mm-hmm.
um, but it does that really well, and that there's areas you'll go to and you'll loop back around and find, oh, I can now shortcut straight to this area because of this item I found.
Yeah.
And I also really enjoyed, they did such a great job of all the collectibles in this game are represented on a kind of a whiteboard with, like I mentioned earlier, the thumbtack and the red yarn.
Mm-hmm.
And so every item you get goes in, I mean, there's 5 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then one in the middle. So for every area you go to, there's a bunch of items you can see that are grayed out. When you find an item, it goes on the board and you can read about it. And then certain things will have like a red tack, and they correlate to something in a different level. Maybe it does such a good job of visually representing this to the player. Um, this could have been so cumbersome, so easily, so hard
Mm-hmm.
to really communicate and hard to understand, and it's just perfectly represented. I love the way they did it. Just everything in this game feels very polished, well thought out. Biggest complaint would be I think it struggles to communicate some of its core concepts to new players. It takes a while to understand how to play the game. They could do a better job onboarding people. But there's my spiel, man. I loved this game. I think it took me, I think I put maybe 12 to 15 hours into it, and just had an absolute blast. Favorite game this year so far.
Wow. You're getting me hyped for all these games that I still need to finish Elden Ring. Elden Ring will be my game of the year by default because it'll be the only thing I played.
Or it'll be your game of the year 2025.
Yeah, honestly. No, I'm excited. Sifu's been on my radar because it got a lot of praise coming out. It seems a little bit niche because of the challenge, but I had a similar reaction as you, mainly that the roguelike genre is something that I wish I liked, but for a variety of reasons that we've talked about, it doesn't quite work. So the fact that they've developed a system where you have these save points, but that you can also like cut down your time. So, the first time you beat level 1, you're age 50, you might want to go back and whittle that down. And you can do that, and then it'll save whatever your best score is, and then you can keep progressing forward. I think that makes it feel a lot more doable. It helps with the sense of progress.
A little more bite size.
Yeah, more bite size. So, and I've heard the art style is absolutely stunning. So that's awesome. I'm glad to hear
Having
it feels
finished
that
it,
good.
yeah, having finished it, I am appalled that this game sits at an 80 on Metacritic, at least
Yeah.
last I checked, and I have it in our fantasy league, right? So there's that aspect to it. But still, I played this game and I'm like, how is this? That's a low score for this game. This game does
Yeah.
so many things so well. Um, I don't know. I think that's a travesty. So I hope it didn't push people away. I do think this is a very specific type of game. If you're not one who likes the challenge, they did introduce difficulty options. I've heard some not great things about them. It sounds like, obviously the game was built for a specific difficulty,
Right.
and maybe they didn't really alter things enough with the other difficulties. So if you really just want to see everything, you can hop in, and the easy difficulty sounds like you can button mash your way through the game without even dying. So there is that option. But yeah, fantastic. And my brother, he had the same problem because he's kind of taken a pause from Elden Ring, and I started playing Sifu, and he got sucked in. He's knee deep in Sifu right now, and maybe he'll find his way back to Elden Ring one day, but
Someday.
someday. So yeah, man, what a treat. I was very pleasantly surprised because I had kind of looked forward to it, but it wasn't on my radar that much. I had heard enough mixed opinions, and it got an 80, and I was just kind of like, this game could be cool. But immediately, an hour or two in, I was just like, wow, this is it. This has it, and I'm all about it. So awesome. It's when you get one of those games, it's so good because like we've talked about, sometimes you force yourself to play games that are all right or you kind of like or whatever. But when you get one of those games that's just fantastic, and you can't imagine a world where this game didn't exist before, it's always a treat. So
and Metacritic scores aren't always representative. I think that's another thing. Is like just because something has
totally. Of course
a 90, a 94, or a 90, it's probably going to be good. But it may, maybe it's not as good as you think it's going to be, or it overhypes it, or it doesn't click with you in the way it did with some people. I feel like the higher scores sometimes are representative of games that a lot more people really like, but sometimes the games that are just like, this feels perfect to me. Those are more often maybe
not for everybody.
Maybe in the 80s, because there's a little bit of that split because they're not made for everybody.
Yeah.
So it's worth thinking about what elements of a game sound enjoyable and then trying it versus, I think it's easy to look at it and be like, oh, that's an 80. I'll go play something that's higher, but that's not always a good reaction. And I have the same thing with books where I go on Goodreads, I'm like, oh, this is a 3.7, but then I read it and I'm like, this is one of my favorite things I've read. Why is this rated so low? But it's because it's tailored to a very specific audience.
That's why we had the conversation we had earlier, because if you make a game specifically for somebody, that means it's not going to be for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so the Metacritic, these reviews, they're going to be kind of all over the place. So knowing what you like can go a long way towards making sure you miss less of those experiences that are actually designed for you. And that's what it felt like with Sifu. I was like, man, this is exactly my jam. So I'm glad I didn't skip it, and I'm sad it's over. I'll probably go back to it and play some on hard mode. There's some DLC coming out a little bit later with a new game mode, so hopefully that's something interesting. But yeah, I'll be curious to see what you think if you get around to any of these after Elden Ring in 2024.
Yeah, can't wait.
All right, well that'll wrap it up. I guess we're all out of things. So if you stuck with us, thank you for being with us for another episode of NeverQuest. And yeah, we'll catch you next time on NeverLag.